For those who don't know, my name is Lexi Temple. I'm running for City Council. So I'm going to open a little bit with how tonight is going to go. So we're here to discuss data centers, something I care deeply about as a city councilor candidate and as someone with a background in healthcare. I also know Sam cares deeply about data centers as a candidate for Rice County Commissioner and as a parent. So Sam is going to take some time today. He's going to walk through what data centers really mean for Faribault specifically, and what tools local government has to set standards to keep residents safe. Then we're going to open it up for questions. It'll be a town hall format, so people can ask Sam questions after his presentation. And then afterwards, we're going to have an open house, so feel free to chat with each other, all the candidates here today. So I know I'm not the only city council candidate here, if you want to raise your hand, if you're in attendance. So these are the people to talk to. And it's a good opportunity before August 11th, which is our primary vote. I'll say that one more time. August 11th.
August 11th.
If you want to take out your phones, put it in your calendar. August 11th is the primary vote. All right, so a couple more things. Bathrooms are right over there. If you do need to leave at any point, these doors will lock behind you going outside. You can go this way will be unlocked. We also want to encourage everyone to be respectful. We want to have a very constructive conversation. So we ask no interrupting, keeping questions short, all around just being very supportive and constructive through this conversation. So thank you again for being here. Again, this is super important, and I'm really glad we had such a great turnout. At this point, I'll pass it over to Sam.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone coming out on a Monday night, especially after the long weekend. You all have many other things that you could be doing, and the fact that we have a packed room with overflow seating tells me that you all know what's at stake as we're talking about data centers. I don't want to assume everybody here knows who I am. I see a lot of familiar faces, but I also see a lot of faces that I don't know. My name is Sam Temple. I live in Faribault. I am running for Rice County Commissioner in District 3. I live on the east side in a house built in 1915 with my wife and daughter, and so all of these issues are very personal to me, and this is something I care about deeply. This November, I'm running against the incumbent County Commissioner, Jerry Hoisington, and I want to tell you why. I don't ever want to be someone who's running just to run, just to have my name on the ballot. I'm running because I want to get things done. I think we need an aggressive, proactive public servant who is working for everyday people, not someone who is passive behind the wheel, someone who takes the wheel and drives and steers the vehicle. What that means is helping the honest businesses in the county, the ones that play fair, the ones that pay fair. I want to make sure they don't get undercut by businesses that have those underhanded tactics, who don't have the community's best interest at heart, that aren't interested in building something in Faribault. It means a county government that puts your health, your safety, and your family security ahead of the convenience of national and international corporations. And I want to talk about who's in this room. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I suspect a fair number of you are on fixed incomes. I expect that many of you are retired. You worked your whole lives, and so every single bill and every single increase that comes through is meaningful, and you notice. You can't afford a new filter on your water because you suddenly hear that there's something in the water that the city water is no longer filtering out. You can't afford to buy bottled water every time you need safe drinking water, or your grandkids or your kids need safe drinking water. Those are the stakes of local office. It's not just about your tax bill. It's not just about the roads getting paved, although those things are very important. It is also about the basic standard that we can provide and that we can accomplish together through our local governments. I am running because I take these stakes seriously, and I personally don't believe the incumbent has been acting with the urgency that I would like to see in our county commissioners. And that's not an attack on Jerry. I think it is genuinely just a different philosophy of how we look about doing things. He's a watchdog. He's an observer. I think we need someone who is proactive, who is looking at the data center issue years before it comes across the desk, so then we're not working from a defensive posture the way we are today. The difference and the urgency is the reason that I'm running. Now, you might be wondering why Sam, the person running for county commissioner, is talking about the data centers, which is largely something that has been discussed at the Faribault City Council level, and that is true. The city is the one who got sued. The city is the one who needs to do further environmental search. The city is the one who's now delaying the project until they can either do more research or the law changes around them. So why am I talking about it? Because how we got here was a gap in the regulatory system, a gap in the protections that are supposed to protect all of us. And I believe that gap ought to be filled, and in fact, Minnesota state statute requires be filled by our county government. The water doesn't stop at the city line. The air that is contaminated doesn't stop at the city line. Your water bills do not stop just because you live on this side of town or that side of town or in a township. The aquifer under Faribault is the same body of water that the private wells are pulling from. It's the same body of water that Northfield's wells are pulling from, that Morristown is pulling from. And these issues impact everyone. It's not just a Faribault problem. This project happens to be proposed in Faribault. It happens to be going through the Faribault thing, but next time it might be Wheeling Township, or next time it might be Shieldsville, and we will still need those protections in place. So yes, we organize at the city level. Yes, we organize at the state level. We cannot miss the county level, because that is where those health and environmental standards have the most direct impact, and we have the most say. The city government only writes rules within its own borders. It's the limit of their power, and the county is the one that can set the health standards. So that is the simple answer. Why am I talking about this? Not because it is a county issue today, but because it should have been a county issue. It should have been an issue that the county commissioners were looking at years ago. Let's talk a little bit about the proposed data center that encouraged all of you to be here today. This week, the City Council will be focusing on a decision, and next week we assume that they will be voting on what to do with the proposed Archer data center. Last August, the City of Faribault looked at a proposal to build a hyperscale data center on around 84 acres on the east side of town, up to 500,000 square feet of buildings, and as much as 120 megawatts of power. A company called Archer Data Centers out of New York paid $4.5 million for the land in Faribault 2 years ago. And the city, faced with a project this size, decided it did not need to take a deep environmental look that state law allows for. It signed off on the quick version of the environmental review and moved along. A St. Paul nonprofit, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, worked with a group of Faribault citizens to slow their roll. That is a major accomplishment. It forced the courts to take a look at this and slow this down. They told the city and the developer they didn't look hard enough, and they took the city to court. And on June 8th, the Minnesota Court of Appeals agreed with those local organizers. The court found that the city broke state environmental law by failing to take a hard look before approving a project like this. We're now at the 30-day mark of that ruling. So in the coming days, like I said, the city will have to decide what it does next. It is expected that they will push the project out a year and see where it goes from there. So there may not be action in the next few months. It might be a very slow-going process. It is still something that needs to be monitored very closely. We also have time for the regulatory structure to change. Roger, could I have you scoot forward a little bit so we're not blocking the door there? Thank you. Now let's talk a little bit about what the court actually said the city failed to examine. The judges rested their decision on one thing above all, that they did not look at the greenhouse gas emissions and the impact, the implications of this site. When they're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, they're not just talking about what goes through the air, they're talking about electricity in general. They're talking about the amount of power that the site requires, and therefore the amount of cooling this site requires. The environmental advocates also flagged that the review didn't seriously grapple with the noise these facilities make when they run 24 hours a day. It didn't grapple with the air pollution. It didn't consider what happens when you add this project on top of every other project that pulls from our water and our power. And that last piece on the water is really what concerns me and where I think the county specifically can have the most action. The review did not answer the water question. It did not answer any of it because of how this business is set up. The developer claimed that the issue of water use and coolant use would be up to a future tenant. So not only did they have very little information, they simply said they didn't need to provide any information about water use or about coolant use. There is no tenant lined up. There is no tenant on paper. Essentially, this means no one through this process is responsible for how much water gets used and whether forever chemicals will be dumped back into the water for use as coolant. Think about what that means. The people who will make that choice, the people who are regulating this, they're not talking to each other. At no point in the process are citizens getting a transparent view of what will be discharged from this facility. What happens if there is a leak? Will we be alerted? Will we even know? None of that was in the environmental review. The city approved the project based on answers nobody had written down. And that's the failure. We're not talking about supervillains here. We're not talking about people trying to do something bad. It's that nobody asked the critical questions. Nobody was in the room thinking of those critical questions and asking them of the project before it was approved. And I want to be fair, because there are many good people at the city who do very good work. This spring they did pass an ordinance setting zoning rules for data centers, and that's a real responsible thing to do. But zoning only says where you can build and how. It does not say anything about water. It does not say anything about power. And that gap, like I said, is where I believe the county should step in. It fits squarely in their authority as laid out in statute, and the court did not rule that anyone in the city acted in bad faith. It ruled the analysis didn't go deep enough. So this is a structural gap, a question of political will and which tools we choose to pick up, and the county, I believe, can close that gap. So let's start with water. A facility this size needs a staggering amount of water to keep its machines from burning up. According to the International Energy Agency, a single 100 megawatt facility can consume around 530,000 gallons of water a day. That is about 6,500 homes. Rough math, that's about a quarter of the homes in the county by a single facility in a day. The data center proposed in Faribault would draw even more than this, since it is a 120 megawatt facility. Some of these designs use far less energy than this, that is true, and we don't actually know which kind of data center this is, and that's the whole point. That's the whole problem. We don't know who the tenant is. We don't know what kind of machines will be used. That uncertainty is not comforting. But pulling that much water doesn't just decrease the water supply, though that is a major concern. It changes the chemistry of the aquifer, the place where we pull the water out of the ground. The U.S. Geological Survey has documented that heavy groundwater pumping releases naturally occurring arsenic and manganese, including in Minnesota's own glacial aquifers, turning water that was safe into water that isn't. Nitrate, which is already a known problem across 36% of our county, sits closest to the surface, where the same hard pumping can pull it down deeper into the drinking wells. And these contaminants do the most damage to the most vulnerable. Nitrate above the safe limit can cause blue baby syndrome, starving an infant's blood of oxygen. Arsenic raises the long-term risk of cancer, even at levels the law calls acceptable. Manganese is harmful to the developing brains of babies and young children. It is infants, the elderly, and people already managing a chronic illness who are hit hardest by the contaminants a data center would pull to the surface in Rice County. And thousands of households in Rice County are on private wells, drinking water that is unfiltered and in many cases never tested because folks cannot afford to treat it out of their own pocket. City water is drawn from the same aquifer as private wells, so a data center pulling on that source puts pressure on literally every tap in the county, including every apartment and every house and every manufactured home and every assisted living facility. We have watched this story play out close to home. In the karst country around Goodhue County, tens of thousands of people drink from private wells. State and local authorities did so little for so long to protect that water that the federal EPA had to invoke emergency powers before Minnesota finally produced a plan to get those families clean water. That was not about data centers, but there is a lesson to take there. When it comes to the water under your feet, the cavalry is not coming. Nobody above us is going to save Rice County until things become catastrophic. So we have to take actions ourselves. That is the cost of passivity. We talked about what data centers take out of the water. Let's talk a little bit about what some of them put into the water. Depending on the cooling technology, some data centers use forever chemicals in their cooling fluids and fire suppression. We often cannot tell which ones do because nothing requires them to disclose it. We don't have standards in place requiring them to monitor for leaks, to build in fail-safes to catch a leak before it reaches our water system, or even to tell us when a leak has occurred. Forever chemicals do not break down, and they have been linked to certain cancers, immune system suppression, thyroid disease, and reproductive and developmental harm. These are not things that even treated city water in cities that have water treatment plants can safely and consistently remove. Some of them can be. Some forever chemicals cannot. The lack of disclosure and awareness of what we are potentially putting into our water is the whole point we're here today. Here in Minnesota, we know the story of forever chemicals better than anyone. In Washington County, a company manufactured these chemicals for decades and left them in the drinking water. And for years, while that was happening, the institutions that were supposed to be watching and protecting citizens sat still. The practice of these companies was new. The science was ahead of the law, and the people in charge waited. And families paid for that wait with their health. Family members died while they waited for the authorities to do something. And that is a pattern that I refuse to repeat here in Rice County. We're not up against cartoon villains. Our obstacle is public officials sitting passive while the new industrial practice moves faster than the rules meant to govern it. What happened in Washington County took decades to surface. The data center question here tonight is the opposite. It is right in front of us, before the first one is running in Rice County. So we're not too late. We have a very rare advantage that ordinary people very rarely have: time. We have the time to get these laws and these protections in place. Data centers, like I said, run 24 hours a day. The constant low hum from cooling systems and backup generators is well documented to disrupt sleep, raise stress, raise blood pressure, with the heaviest burden falling on children, the elderly, and people already managing chronic illnesses. This has been enough for some data centers around the country to be pulled and scrapped completely when net residents brought up noise complaints. In the case of Archer, that is less likely to be an issue. Again, they had that zoning. They had the Planning Commission and the City Council make that decision about where they can and cannot be built. But again, that protection stops at the city line. It doesn't protect someone a block over in a township from having one right next to their homestead. Many of these sites run on-site diesel and gas generators that release emissions into the air we breathe. The Archer review was supposed to analyze exactly this, and it did not, as cited by the court. That was a big reason of why it was put back. When the reporting and the safeguards are this feeble, we cannot take a developer's word that the air will be fine, that the water will be fine. They need to prove it first and put it in writing, and the law should require that they follow that promise. I've said Archer a few times. Let me talk a little bit about who they are and where they factor into all of this, because my concern is not this one facility alone, stopping this one facility. We need standards in place to be fair for everyone, for every industry, and also for every community member. This is not about one company. They just happen to be the closest to the finish line. Most of the companies in this business are far less transparent than Archer, and we do give them credit for that, but the lack of transparency of those other companies almost never means they're being more careful with your health. I want to talk about the particular business practices of this company because, well, Sam, if they're being transparent, if they are taking the time to do additional reviews, if they are holding these discussions with the citizens, maybe they're not so bad. And I'm not saying they're bad. I want to talk about their business practice because that, I think, will inform us more than any empty promises about how they will conduct themselves. Does anyone here know who built the company? Who the CEO and founder of the Archer Data Center is? It's not important. He's not a supervillain, and you've never heard of him before. He spent 10 years on Wall Street at Deutsche Bank, running a desk that traded and repackaged subprime mortgage securities. The exact thing at the center of the 2008 economic crash, the one that cost people we all know their savings and their homes. After that, he launched a hedge fund started by the trader made famous in the movie The Big Short, which was about that subprime mortgage disaster. And that individual is not as handsome as Ryan Gosling. And I don't say this to smear these folks. I've never met them. I'm not going to mention their names because this isn't about any one individuals. Archer is a financial company. They are not a data center company. They're an investment group. They are set up to build, to sell, and then move on. And their record shows this. Archer has built a grand total of 1 data center before. That is their entire history. 1 data center outside Nashville. And once it was built, they brought in a company owned by one of the largest asset managers in the world, sold their stake, and walked away. That is the entire record we are expected to trust. So think about what that means for us. Even if this company sits in front of the city council, the people of Faribault, and agrees to every protection we ask for, the company making those promises likely won't be the company that owns the thing in 5 years. And even if they do, they claim they are not responsible for how their tenants run things. The machines inside, the ones that actually use the water and burn the power and potentially use forever chemicals, those belong to the tenants that come and go. A promise is only worth what's written down and made binding. And right now, the reason we're talking about all of this before it gets built and not by the time the tenant comes in, it's because cities and counties have very little to know when those transactions are taking place, when new folks move in and move out, and more importantly, very few mechanisms for monitoring their new practices, what they're taking from the environment and putting back into it. That is why this answer cannot be a separate agreement with each individual developer. The answer has to be a standard, a rule applied to everyone and attached to the industry itself. So it doesn't matter who buys it, who leases it, who flips it, we are protected regardless. There is one protection in place in law right now that I think is worth knowing, and that is related to your electric bill. Last year, the state legislature passed some of the strongest protections in the country to keep big industries from dumping their power costs onto the rest of us. Most, if not all of you, get your power from Xcel Energy, and those rules cover Xcel directly. A company like Archer now has to pay its own way for the grid it demands, and it can't leave you holding the bill. That is the government doing exactly what it ought to be doing, right? It sees a problem the size of the whole energy grid, they legislate, and they protect us at the scale of the whole energy grid. So it can be done, but it's not airtight. Our own Attorney General has warned that these protections only work if the company is made to pay its real costs, not some friendly estimate. That fight is still going on right now. So the guardrail is built. It's a good one in theory, but someone has to keep watching to make sure it holds. This is exactly the kind of work where aggressive, proactive local elected officials are essential, and where passive officials can unintentionally do real harm. And the state protection didn't come from nowhere or from a benevolent legislator who knew best. It came from people advocating. It came from people making clear that this is an issue that will determine who they vote for. Power must be leveraged. That is the whole exercise of self-governance. The state is also not doing nothing on water. That's a triple negative. It permits big water withdrawals through the DNR. It sets drinking water standards through the health department. Those tools exist. But those tools were built for a different world, and they leave a lot to be desired, to say the least. They were not written for a single facility pulling this hard on an aquifer we all share. They barely reach these regulations. They barely reach the thousands of private wells in the county, where no one is required to test the water at all. And nowhere in that whole system is there a rule that says a data center has to prove your water is safe before it turns the pump on, instead of after. So here's the honest picture. Your electric bill, the state has built some protections with some gaps. On your water, it left holes exactly the size and shape of a county, and the county has not stepped up to close them. That gap is not somebody else's job. It is the job of the seat I am running for. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I would do with it. There are 2 policy tools that I've identified, and I would move to use them both. The first is the money. These projects come to the county with their hands out. They frequently ask for tax breaks, tax increment financing, tax abatement. deals that let them keep the taxes the rest of us pay. And here is what very few people will tell you: a county is not required to say yes. It's a choice. It's a tool designed to decide which industries we lift up and which we don't. And as your commissioner, when a hyperscale data center comes asking the county to defer its taxes, I will vote no, every time. When the cities ask us to do the same, I will file my objections and let you know what is being proposed and supported by other levels of government. When the city is asking for tax increment financing, the only lever might be lodging an objection as your county commissioner. But as your county commissioner, I'm organizing events like this. I'm getting contact info for issues like this, so that if there's ever something that's beyond what I can do with a single vote as county commissioner, I'll let you know, so that your voices can be made heard at the city level, or the state level, or the federal level, because the county government intersects with all of those. Data centers are not the kind of business we should be subsidizing, not for the handful of permanent jobs it brings. And if these companies want to build here and they can meet health and safety standards, bully for them. They can move in on their own dime. And let's get something out of the way. The county's hands are not tied. It's not as though there's no money or no tool available for it. I simply don't believe that. This is a board that approved $48.86 million in bonds for a new jail. When something is a priority, they pull every lever and find every fund, and they show real ingenuity in doing it. So the tools exist. What has been missing is the political will to aim that same creativity at your water, your air, and your family's budget. It's not a choice, a binary choice, between supporting business and supporting people. The real question is who your county government is willing to put in the work for. I want to talk about that second policy tool because it would reach every corner of the county, not just the businesses that come coming for tax assistance. The second policy tool under Minnesota law says that the county is a public health authority. It has both the power and the duty to protect the health of the people who live here. And that power does not stop at city limits. It reaches into every city, every township, every village in Rice County. And this is not some untested theory I dreamed up. Counties have used this exact authority for generations. Protecting public health is one of the oldest jobs a county has. It reaches into the cities. Olmsted County has run a countywide health ordinance since 2002 that governs Rochester itself, a city bigger than anything we've got, and in more than 20 years, no one has beaten it in court. Olmsted uses that same authority to license and inspect restaurants, the pools, and the hotels in every community inside its borders. This is settled, working, everyday good government. And when a Minnesota county has stood up to a polluting industry to protect its water and air, the courts have backed it. Winona County said no to a mining operation it believed put its water at risk. The company sued, and the county won, all the way up to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Careful county governments have stood on this ground for decades. I'm not asking you to gamble on something new. I'm asking you and our local government to pick up a tool that's been on the shelf this whole time and simply not used. Here's what I would build with that tool: a set of health performance standards that apply to any industry, including data centers, anywhere in this county. The idea is simple enough to fit on a postcard: protect our water, protect our air, protect our quiet. And a company has to prove it before it breaks ground and not after. If a business can meet that standard, good. It gets approved like any other business, and the good operators, the ones who already do the right thing, they'll be glad that the rules are clear. If a company can't meet it, then it has no business pulling our water and pushing its cost onto us. I am pro-honest business, and I support regulation that helps the honest businesses. On day one, that is what I would do. I would bring that package to the board, I would send it to the staff and the county attorney for review and refinement, and that's the difference between watching government passively and making it happen actively. I would also authorize county staff to get creative and do the research. What are other counties doing? How can we take the best mechanisms of other programs to create a new Rice County-sized tool? I guarantee they already do this. I was a government employee for a while. I know that, you'd look, the grass is always greener, you'd see what other cities are doing, and man, if we only had the go-ahead to do something like that, we could save money, we could be more efficient, we could reach people in a better way. But when the elected officials that make the decisions about how you spend your day, how you use your resources, they're the ones that get to say no. And I would say yes, get creative, find the most efficient way to do this. I expect that they would be eager to push the envelope on behalf of all of us. In closing, data centers are new. The wave of them, the size of them, the speed that they're being pushed, the urgency with which they expect us to approve them and welcome them with open arms, and our protections have not kept up. And they rarely do unless somebody makes them. In Washington County, the law showed up decades late, and families paid the price. They paid with their lives, and we do not have to live out that same story again. I'm not asking you to be afraid. I'm not asking you to be afraid of the future. I'm asking you to help me make sure the future doesn't get built at the expense of you, of your kids, and the people who will drink this water long after any of us in this room are gone. That, I believe, is the job of local government, from city council to the county commissioner to the state legislator to the planning commission and the environmental commission. I'm going to need your help to get there, and so are the other candidates in this room who share these same priorities. So with that, we've got a second mic here, and I'd love to take your questions. And yes, I am sweating as much as I look like I'm sweating.
What is a data center?
Peter asked, what is a data center?
I mean, hand to Linda too, she signed up for this, but.
Thank you.
The question, what is a data center? It is essentially the processing system that makes the internet work, that makes the data work. So anytime we log into Facebook, anytime we log into Google, that information has to come from somewhere. Right now, the data that we have is too dense to exist solely in the cloud. The cloud is actually a warehouse somewhere in the middle of Arizona. And that is what the data center is. So why do we see this explosion right now? Because there is a new, the explosion of NVIDIA chips that comes after this, specifically used in artificial intelligence and large language models. They require a vast, vast amount of data for every single use of those devices. So that is the big explosion we're seeing. So when people see the concerns about data centers and they see people pairing that with billionaires, they see people pairing that with concerns about wealth inequality and unstable markets, that's because the surge in data centers comes from the gamble that AI is going to be as big as all of the investors think it's going to be. And I don't know if anyone here follows the stock market all that closely, but a lot of those promises get made. Not all of them are asking local communities like Faribault to risk so much to support that gamble. Question.
What is the alleged benefit to Faribault building this? Why does it seem like you're dealing with the council to go along with it?
The question is, what is the alleged benefit of the data center, specifically being in Faribault? The one thing you'll hear is jobs, and that is one thing that, short term, there would be a lot of labor. There would be a lot of good union jobs in the actual construction of the thing. I can't deny that. But long term, past the construction phase, there are very few jobs. And actually, what I have found when looking through the data in Faribault is we do not have a lack of jobs. We do not have a lack of employment opportunities. We have a lack of good paying jobs, but we also have a lack of housing for folks that would be hired to move into Faribault, to work at the data center, to be the engineer. So on the one hand, the idea is it would create jobs and there would be some tax benefit. I'm wary of that because I don't fully believe that it's something like a third of the city of Faribault commutes out of town and a third of the jobs in town are filled by people commuting in. We have a mismatch of people who theoretically want to live here, would rather be living in the community they work in, and can't find housing to work here, and yet we're going to prioritize bringing in new jobs. So I don't necessarily believe the jobs benefit holds as much water, no pun intended, as it should. In addition, it doesn't generate sales tax. I don't personally trust those national companies to document every single sale that theoretically goes through their data center, because it's not like they have a customer coming in, coming out. It's not like they have a receipt that is tracked to 55021. All that to say, I don't personally see a lot of benefit to doing it, but I know some arguments have been this is a low-profile investment. It doesn't require a lot of additional traffic. It doesn't require a lot of additional noise other than the low hum. So I think that for some elected officials, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but for some elected officials, it is out of sight, out of mind, and this is one of the most out of sight, out of mind industries from that perspective. Questions?
Yeah, so just a question. I know Rice County Commissioner, obviously you're going to be handling, I believe you handle the landfill as a commissioner as well?
Yep.
Do you have any plans? These sites generally go on a 3-year cycle of electronic waste, so the chips you mentioned, generally they're getting rid of them every 3 years. Do you have any plans or protections in mind for not just the impact to the landfill, but the cost impact to the rest of the members of the community if this data center were to open?
It's a great question. So the question, since the county does a lot with waste and specifically the landfill in Rice County, do I have any plans related to that? And the truth is, I think that needs to be part of those health and safety standards. It's not just about what gets discharged in the water, it's also what gets thrown out. And that is common. There are plenty of industries that do have to have very specific standards locally on how they get rid of their waste. And this is something we really can't afford to have any wiggle room on in Faribault. Faribault has many brownfields and Superfund sites, which is all to say a lot of bad stuff that is seeping into the water, that is seeping into the soil from old industrial sites. You think of the farmer seed and nursery building. The real reason that had to be torn down was because the ground underneath it was irradiated from its years of industrial use. So in order for them to save that historic structure, which I was on the HBC and the Planning Commission when this went through, so I have strong feelings about it, but they would have had to have lifted the whole building off the ground, completely mediated all the soil underneath, and then put it back in the ground. And we have sites like that all across Rice County. Faribault is where the biggest concentration of those contaminated sites live. So that is one where we need to have those protections in place, and we need to be more forward-thinking so that my kids and grandkids aren't dealing with the Superfund sites from the data centers and the dump, because the chemicals and the plastics and the manufacturing byproducts that are from the Rice County dump, the old Superfund site, those have been found in wells, water wells, across the county. So this is not something that is contained. It is not something that is currently being mitigated. And in fact, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is doing a lot of work on this right now. If we had been proactive about this 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 5 years ago, we might be in a different situation. Thank you for the question.
Part of this project has to do with TIFs.
Mm-hmm.
And every time a TIF is granted, property taxes go up because the organizations that get the tax relief, those taxes are related. Also, it seems to me that anytime a TIF is granted, there is infrastructure work that usually has to be accomplished. And that cost then is immediate versus the delay.
Yeah.
And especially it affects organizations that have difficulty in raising funds for
Yeah.
like schools
Mm-hmm.
and the city,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. So
Yeah.
could you speak to that?
Yeah, so the question is about tax increment financing, how that, and let me know if I'm summarizing this okay, it's about tax increment financing and how those benefits tend to push the costs of new development onto local governments, onto other districts and taxing authorities that are already kind of strapped for funds. Is that a good summary? So tax increment financing, very simply, is the process of withholding The idea is that you're creating a benefit for local businesses. A local business would approach the City Council or the Rice County Board of Commissioners and say, hey, we want to do this project here, but we need extra cash to cash flow the project. We just don't have enough funds on hand. It was initially set up in state statute to promote specific businesses or even to deal with some of those Superfund and brownfield sites that I mentioned before, where, hey, we want to build here, but we need to do a lot of mediation. As the city, we go, great, I don't think any other developer is going to want to do work here, so we'll help cash flow this so the site can be developed. Sometimes TIF is just mediation. Sometimes tax increment financing is just used to make the site usable for future sales. Lately, a lot of tax increment financing has been done through the city of Faribault. There hasn't been a lot through the Rice County government, but every time the city does tax increment financing, the county government also loses their local portion of funds. It's not that those industries are paying zero taxes. That's not what tax increment financing is. They pay the taxes, and then the city accounts for, if there had been no development, what would the value of this property be? So basically, for the duration of the agreement, the value of the property continues to go up and up and up, but the company only has to pay what it originally was when they purchased it. So they make the argument, well, we're not losing anything. Well, we're not losing any taxes. In some cases, sure, it's still a net benefit. You're getting a business that otherwise, in theory, would not have been there, that otherwise would not have been developed. Maybe you're getting one of those contaminated sites removed. I'm not saying there's no place for TIF. But, to your point, very rarely have I seen TIF used locally for housing that is truly affordable. There's usually a percentage that is set aside, and I'm not even talking about stuff that would be Section 8 or voucher housing for people in really desperate straits. I'm talking just lower priced than the market. Very rarely do they say 100% of units have to be this. Right now there's TIF, tax increment financing for what is largely a group of Airbnbs being created downtown. And again, I was the chair of the Heritage Preservation Commission. It's hard to cash flow businesses. It's hard to cash flow historic buildings. They're expensive to maintain and especially expensive to restore when there's been years of neglect. And we have seen that. That's a separate, we'll do a different town hall about that. But it's very rarely are the benefits to the community larger than the benefits to the business. So as county commissioner, I would not approve, and I would vote against anything that I had the authority to vote against that doesn't both, if it's a housing project, make it 100% affordable below the median. There's a specific AMI calculation to get that, but also a living wage. If part of the idea is that tax increment financing helps engender development and helps generate new jobs, we should make sure that they are jobs that pay well so that the people that are working for the companies getting these tax benefits can afford maybe, just maybe, to live in the apartment that they're building or in the unit that they're renovating. Yeah. Without getting too much further into tax policy, I appreciate the question.
How long do TIFs last? I mean, is there a typical standard amount of time that a TIF is given to the company?
So how long does tax increment financing usually last? It can be arranged. So TIF is very customizable. So that's why tax increment financing in Northfield might look different than it does in Faribault, might look different than it does in New Ulm or Rochester. So a lot of it is up to individual cities, individual counties, individual taxing authorities that are granting tax increment financing. Most typical would be 10 to 20 years.
I'm going to guess that you're going to hear this. So you're anti-business?
Yes, the question is, so you're anti-business. And that I understand that some people will say that. When we can use labels to reduce ideas down to those simple ideas, some people are going to say that. I think most people understand that there is a difference between responsible regulation and punishing business. I'm not interested in punishing someone just because they are trying to bring a business, trying to employ people, trying to live their dreams of building data centers. But I think, and I come from a family of small business owners. They're most of who I would have worked with on the Planning Commission and the Heritage Preservation Commission. There is a big difference between the mom and pop shop downtown, a big difference between a local developer who genuinely does care about the community. They could be investing anywhere, but they're choosing to invest in their hometown. There's a big difference, a bigger gulf between them and these national and international corporations than there is between a local individual that has a small business versus a local individual that doesn't have a small business. So I think the fear of dissuading business, the fear of disincentivizing business is often used by those big corporations under the guise of defending those small mom and pop shops. But I think when you have policy that prioritizes everyday people, you also see the benefit of those honest businesses that care about the community. It's a great question. I do appreciate you asking that.
So hopefully this isn't too deep in the weeds, but.
We're already there.
Oh, we're already there, okay. So I have a concern about the amount of capital that data centers and businesses of this type are going out after, because that pushes up rates for everybody. You know, if you're trying to get a home loan, and this is like sucking up all the oxygen in the financial markets, it's all connected. And it just seems like we're eating our own tails, because you can't, I mean, data centers seem to be in the business of churning information that they didn't create, they just collect it, and the queries go in, and we get our ladies with 3 boobs and stuff like that, and everybody thinks it's funny. But the churning of the financial markets, the real estate markets, the crypto, it's just not helping.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to try and summarize that, but the broader concern is not just the local piece of it, but macroeconomically, how these industries are impacting the market, impacting the ability for you and me to get a home loan, to get a home improvement loan, impacting the ability of everyday people to access capital when a lot of it and the rates and the structure is being set by those national corporations. And it is a big issue, but truth be told, it's not something that the county would be able to have a lot of say in. But I think it is an illustration of how these systems change things, because no one went about setting a rule that would only benefit my industry or only benefit that industry. It is a systemic issue. The system was built to help those with large amounts of capital, to help those that have a lot of liquidity to move quickly from that to that to that, to build the data center, to sell the data center, to move on to the next investment. The system was built for people working at that level. We've moved away from our economic system being designed for everyday people, being designed first for folks trying to buy their first home, built first for people trying to just live out their retirement. At one point, it was built that way, and slowly we've moved to prioritize the wealthier, the investment firms. So while there isn't a local solution directly to that, I think it is indicative of why we need this level of engagement and this level of activity. Because if a group of people can organize at this size around data centers, they can organize at this size around state financial policy, they can organize at this size to federal financial policy. But you can't do any of the stuff up top until you get that local piece of it, and that's what I'm committed to building.
I'm back again.
Welcome.
I just wanted to add on to that. First off, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not presenting financial advice. You mentioned the housing recession back in 2008 to 2012. I think we're all familiar with that.
Yeah.
My parents lost their house during that period of time. We mentioned the financial markets. Just wanted to present a simple fact for everybody here. The average bond rate for these data centers is 6.185%. Doesn't mean much to many people, but to give an example or comparison, the bond rate for our housing recession crisis was 4 to 6%, and that was considered a tough bond. So these data centers across the country that are being funded by tax dollars, getting tax breaks, and being opened up left and right, and then being sold off to private companies, have a higher bond yield rate than the housing recession crisis caused. So just something to keep in mind, especially for an investment portion, but also for the local impact to our community. We have confirmed with Steel Waseca Co-op, who is going to be providing the electricity for this corporation, that they will not push the cost on to the individuals of these Steel Waseca Co-op customers, but they also did state, and this was on KUYC News after an interview I did with them, they did confirm that if the data center were to close, the electrical rates that they're contracted into would then be pushed on to the individuals of everybody who is being supported by Steel Waseca. So just to give an example, this data center uses up 5 times the amount of electricity our entire city uses average annually. And that would then be pushed on to everybody who is on that Steel Waseca grid and potentially come up to us because, as mentioned, Excel is also getting bombarded by these. So just something to keep in mind as the data center comes around, as we look at the financial markets, and we take in mind that last time this happened, a lot of people made money off of those bad bond rates. There's a possibility it could happen again, and it's not just going to be your bank accounts that are hit by this, but it could also be your electrical bill for everybody in this region. So
Yeah.
keep your eyes open. I'm very happy you're doing this because it is extremely important that we insulate ourselves from that kind of an impact.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jacob, especially what I presented here was about assuming things go quote-unquote well and as planned. To your point, there's also major consequences where that state legislation still has a gap for if those businesses fail. Hi.
This is a much simpler, basic question. Where exactly is the proposed site for this data center? Is it within the city limits?
It is within the city limits, yes.
And where is it in relation to something I can?
It's on the east side of town. I don't want to speak out of turn and say it wrong. I will get that information to you.
If you know where the Daikin facility is in the industrial sector to north of town, it's right across the street from Daikin.
Right past TriStar.
Yeah.
I call it the coral reef. For a while, it was the industrial island. If you look at a map of Faribault, you see that there's the city limits here, and then there's this little bubble up here, because instead of just annexing straight out, they annexed a little bit here. So the island, the industrial island in the city zoning, it's becoming a coral reef that will slowly expand. I liked that metaphor. The Planning Commission didn't take it up, but I'm still pretty proud of it, so now it's in the record. But
I will just add, there is not many residents within earshot of this facility, but there are people who live directly within 200 yards. And Archer actually very specifically mentioned that in the recent legal letter to the city. Those people living within 200 yards of that facility will have a constant hum to the point where it's going to become almost unbearable for them to live there. There's also workers out there. There's also a cattle farm. Proven fact is cattle don't breed as well when these facilities are near them. This isn't, again, impacting not just human life, but animal life too. So just keep that in mind. Again, Archer responded saying they're not within 200 yards. They use that number very specifically because they know that it still will have an impact to the people who live out there.
yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, I'll go over here and then we'll go to the middle there.
If the data center gets approved, has there been any talks on the city or county level of building more infrastructure to accommodate the electric and the water that they need?
Great question. So would there be more infrastructure built to accommodate the data center if it were approved? Yes, it would have to be. It would be hooked up to city water. It would have to be part of the electrical grid. That's part of what we're talking about. It's not just the cost of the electricity once it's in there. They also have to get the electricity to the site, and they have to get the water to the site. And that's the other thing when we talk about tax increment financing. When a new business comes in and they're developing new, it's not just the cost of the wear and tear on the roads and the infrastructure. Very often it means building new trunk highways, building new roads that can get there, the new sewage lines that can absorb the runoff. So yes, it would require all of that new infrastructure to be built. And so that is an additional expense to the city of Faribault. It would likely be some additional expense to the county, though I don't know if they've gotten that far in those discussions. And to Jacob's point, it would also be a cost that is there if, God forbid, the data center ever went belly up. We would be left with all of that infrastructure and the maintenance required for that infrastructure. And we had a question over here in the middle first.
Does Minnesota Pollution Control Agency have an opinion on these things?
The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has some work on this, Currently, in my opinion, their standards are not up to speed on what needs to be done here, partially with the work that is required from the legislative branch to get those things approved, to get those new measures in place. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency already has warnings about things like manganese and arsenic in the water, but that does not change the fact that they still accept levels higher than what the science supports for human consumption. So even when the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency or the Environmental Protection Agency says this water meets standards, it doesn't actually mean it meets the standards for human health. And that's where, right now, yeah, the city water does meet standards. Water across the county meets standards. But when the standard is 0, as said by medical professionals, and we have anything above that, we're not meeting those health standards. Right now we're meeting legal requirements, but I wouldn't trust the legal requirements to say what is and isn't safe.
Does the MPCA have any power or teeth or anything?
I don't want to speak beyond, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I don't have specifics on the MNPCA, partially because I think it is a lot faster and more direct to do those things locally. Unless there is a very big change in how efficiently the legislature and the executive branch of the state can move, I would have more faith in doing things locally. Hi.
Hey, thank you for this presentation today. One of the things, you kind of gave the doom and gloom water scenario, which
Yeah.
I appreciate that it's kind of letting people know what's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
There are other options available.
Mhm.
I'm not totally this or
Yeah, yeah.
that there's closed loop water systems
Mhm.
that are sealed systems that you don't even refill them.
Mhm.
They just use it and they pump up the chilled water back to the system to cool it.
Yeah.
Goes outside, goes across an air exchanger.
Mhm.
There's no additional water that goes back into the ground.
Yeah.
So there are other options available.
Mhm.
I don't know if we get to dictate for, those type of systems that are used for, Archer Daniel or not, or if we don't like what you're saying, we can say, hey, there's another option available, what about this?
Mhm. A great question. So just kind of talking about, yes, where I discussed this was largely the worst case scenario, right, is the scariest version of if they pump as much water as they could, what would that look like? If they use the worst coolant, what would impact would that have? And you're right that there is a gradient here. The fact of the matter is Archer in their own appeal to the court said that they could not say one way or the other what cooling would be used there. Exactly. They need to pin him down, exactly your point. And yeah, I think that is one thing that would be most effective locally, and that's why I want to set a standard and not have it be project to project. Things get tricky when governments try and say exactly precisely how you can or cannot conduct business. So saying, well, you need to use this cooling system or that cooling system, that can be very difficult. And when we talk about pushback from being anti-business and things like that, that can also be seen as hampering innovation. We've seen that happen where, like, well, the law says we have to do it this way, even though last year we invented this new thing that could do it better. That's why a lot of what I focus on are those health outcomes and those health concerns, because that is very squarely within the county government's authority, is as the public health body. So that's why that's where my focus is. I absolutely agree that we could regulate best practices. To me, that is more of a state or a federal-sized issue, whereas what we can do locally is focus on those health outcomes. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and that's absolutely true. The fact is, there's nothing in place that so we can pin them down before they come here. Thank you.
Why is Faribault a suitable location from Archer's perspective?
Why is Faribault a suitable location from the Archer Data Center perspective? I don't like to speak for other people. We are an industrial town. We're a blue-collar town. There's a lot of people who work there. We have that industrial park north of town, the Coral Reef. I'll catch that on. So that is one thing we're generally seen as inviting to businesses. We have a very effective economic development authority and city staff that does those things to attract and retain businesses. And also Minnesota, we have a lot of water. If you're building in California or you're building in Arizona or Colorado, you might be looking at the edge of a cliff in the next 10, 20 years on water supply. Minnesota, we don't have an unlimited amount, but we have a lot more water than a lot of places in the continental United States. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is one where I've been doing a lot of my own research too, and you see it time and time again all across the country. They are targeting, like let's call this what it is. They are targeting small communities like ours who don't have the protections in place, who are scared to say no to the big money willing to come in here, because it's easy to see that tax benefit as a way to fund our schools and fund these infrastructure projects we need and fund our buildings that all need new roofs. It's easy to just come here and dangle the carrot. And people like us are gonna say, you know, we really do need that money. Let's sell our souls for it. And you're seeing it across the country. That's why they're coming here, is because they thought we would be easy prey. And for half a second, we kind of were. And now we're standing up and saying, no, it's not okay. We don't want to sell our souls. We want our water. We want our health. We want our community to stay our community. Sorry.
No, thank you.
I'm a little passionate about this one here.
It's almost like you're passionate enough to run for city council. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have a lot to say, but I'm just going to say this. Tomorrow night, the city council,
Will you hold this a little closer, Ann?
they're going to have a work session at 6 o'clock, and they're going to talk about this issue. And the city has a decision to make.
Yeah.
And they're going to vote on it the following week on the 14th. But this gentleman who's from Archer is going to be there. So whoever can come,
Yeah.
I think I would encourage you. I don't believe you'll be able to talk.
Correct.
But you can listen.
Yeah. So tomorrow is a city council work session. There won't be public comment. There should be some portion of public comment the following week at the next meeting. But if you are going to speak, get there early, talk to the city clerk, talk to city staff. They will help you find not the right time, but the time that you will be allowed, because there's nothing worse than waiting until later in the agenda thinking you'll have the chance to speak, and then you don't have the chance to speak. So get there early, talk to the city clerk, find the right spot in the agenda.
So it's usually 15 minutes right after the council starts. You only have 3 minutes to speak, so you have to get there early if you want to talk, because there's only basically 5 people who can talk.
Yeah. Thank you, Ann. That'll be at City Hall, a few blocks that way.
I just want
with
to
that after.
understand, you say Archer has purchased the property and they actually build the structure and then they turn around and lease it to a tenant, you could say tenant.
Yes.
I'm trying to understand who actually owns the equipment that's causing the damage.
Archer is the developer that builds the facility, gets all the utilities, the power, the water, and in the one case that we have to go off of, they then sold the build, not just leased it. They are open to the idea of leasing, but they just sold it entirely to someone else.
Are they selling an empty building and the tenant comes in and puts all these processes in?
I believe they sold before there was any machines in. I'd have to check that last time in their Nashville location, but the point is, we don't have a lot to go off of, and they don't have a strong plan in place. If I were to bet, I would say that they will be gone before the first server moves in. That would be my bet.
It seems to me that my neighbors, I sit out on the front porch and have beer, and they have other things too. And and they're working down at the turkey plant and at the food plant. For the most part, they don't vote. And you know, I admire your ability to articulate the problem, but when I go home, I'll forget half of it, and when I try to articulate it to them, they just say, you know, have another beer. You know, and But if you look at people who are currently progressive and like Mamdani and other ones, it's the one-liners. You know, the other folks, you know, just look at YouTube and some of the political ads coming out. They're not complicated. They don't explain anything. They say, if I'm governor, I'm going to fight fraud. I'm going to get rid of it. End of story. And that gets these guys excited. So if you can come up with a one-liner, it only has to be half true. and you know, when we're talking about the developer, put a name on them. You know, they're a sleazebag or something like that. Make up a good name. Or if we're talking about the development center, you can find them on YouTube. People who live next to them that really articulate what it's like to live with the hum and what they got through. But put a little label on it, and if somebody disagrees with you, you don't have to explain it. Just say it louder. and the punchline comes. Probably will agree that they don't want poison water. They don't want, you know, but get it down to one line and said, if you don't want this stuff, vote in the sand. And that they'll remember. But a long explanation trying to get them to where we're at tonight. And I hear so many people say, well, you know, I get up and talk at the school board meeting, or I get up and talk at the city council, but I don't know enough to really do it. Just get that one liner down.
Yeah.
And go out and find the city council members at the bar afterwards and repeat it again. And
I appreciate that.
very
Yeah,
easy.
thank you. I appreciate that. I will work on the advice. I'll aim for 100% true over the half, but I appreciate that. I want to make sure, just to be respectful of time, make sure folks have a chance to talk to candidates. Really keep it to questions. Eric, you have a question?
Yeah, a quick statement, then a question.
Cool.
Okay.
I'll let it slide.
Yes, I'm Eric, and this is a little surreal for me because I grew up on 150th Street East, which is the address of this data center in Rice County, just a different part of it. This is kind of mind-blowing hearing about this. You know, I thought that was kind of the middle of nowhere, but here we've got a data center. I now live in Northfield, and if you draw a 15-mile radius around Northfield, there are 5 hyperscale data centers with planned locations.
Yeah.
Faribault's just one of those.
Yeah.
The other 4 are in Dakota County. I can show you a map of that. I brought it along. It's mind-blowing. I don't think a lot of Northfielders realize that. How do you see Rice County working with Dakota County? And this is a regional problem, right?
Yeah.
Rice County is actually the smallest of those 5.
Yeah.
By far. I find that shocking. And again, we're talking about sharing an aquifer. Share an aquifer with all those 5 data centers, potential data centers. So again, I wonder how do you see Rice County working in an inter-county way on this data center problem?
Yeah. How does Rice County work with other counties? Partially by doing good work, by getting things done. That's what local governments like to do. They see what's working over there, and they go, great, I can use that. Copy and paste. Sometimes they'll make it work a little bit more for their community. Sometimes they'll customize it here or there. But what very rarely happens is that everybody just comes together and passes the thing all at once. You need the first county, the first city to pass the interim moratorium, or to pass this new safety standard or that safety standard. And the others will follow suit. But that's also part of staying engaged, organized. You know, you're here, you can't vote for me or any of the other city council candidates here, and yet you are here because you're our neighbor, you're just a neighbor a few city lines over. And that is what happens when folks are engaged, right? Is if we can all work together to get this done, and you can talk to 5 people to get that thing done, well, odds are that network is going to grow, and that network also then extends to Goodhue County and Dakota County and Steele County. So for me, when I see, you know, there's a lot of issues in the world, there's a lot of things that make me concerned for the future my children, for their children, but where I kind of, when the scope of it feels so daunting, I find more hope in the local piece, because we do, it doesn't feel like it sometimes, but we do have a lot of power. None of us have a lot of power alone. Together, we do have a lot of power. And I mean, my race was decided by 134 votes in 2022 when I ran for county commissioner the first time. 134 votes. If everyone here talked to 5 people, that's the difference. That's how it works. So if everybody here can talk to 5 people, maybe you get one of those people passionate enough to talk to 5 more people. That's how you get that done. And to Roger's point, the part of it is the getting that message across, getting it down to that soundbite, making people aware that there are stakes in their local election. These aren't issues that are just decided on a presidential ballot or the Senate or the governor. It is decided locally. It's decided by your county commissioners and your city council members. And if everybody knows at least one person who can convince them of that, you can make a difference. With that.
What is needed, and I'm perfectly serious, is a good slogan.
A good slogan, yes.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
That will give people listening.
Absolutely. Well, what we'll do, we'll have this now. We can all brainstorm some good slogans for me and the other counselors. I appreciate that. Thank you all so much for being here. This is being recorded. I'll make sure this is online. If you signed up at those QR codes or on those sheets of paper, I'll make sure you get a recording. Maybe you can just talk to 10 people and we can make it happen. And then you can make up for your neighbor who won't talk to anyone. So with that, thank you all for being here. City council candidates, raise your hand. Thank you.